Okay, Jovan, before we start,
Yeah.
I've got a question for you.
All right.
Not taken away from the question that we're going to do.
Right.
This is a side question. Have you ever heard of the Mandela Effect?
Yes. Yes, I have.
Okay. So you know what that's all about.
Yeah, it's an existential crisis of our memory.
Very well put.
It is the idea that the things that we've experienced and remembered are not actually
What happened?
what actually is.
Right.
And the controversy is that in a shared human experience, flow of history, historical consciousness, however you want to say it, social consciousness, we somehow all have believed one thing, and
the truth is out.
And the truth, as they say, is out there.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's wrong. Like Berenstein Bears versus Berenstein versus Berenstein. I think that's what it is. Or
I am your father.
I am your father.
Not. He never said Luke.
Yeah.
Another good one. The Wicked Queen.
Yes.
Mirror, mirror on the wall.
Mirror, mirror. Yeah.
She never said that.
Yes.
She
says magic.
Right. And one I saw today, it's the first time I saw it. Captain Kirk never said, "Beam me up, Scotty." They said the closest he ever came was in Voyage Home, the movie.
Yeah.
He said, "Scotty, beam us up."
Which is late.
Yeah.
Compared to, what is it, 2 seasons of Star Trek?
Yeah.
The original series, then you had the animated series, and then the movies.
So,
and I don't classify the motion picture as a Star Trek movie. It just doesn't.
Well, yeah. But the reason I ask this is, are there things in our Christian life that
sure.
we could be misremembering?
Sure. I don't know if this would technically fall into the category of Mandela Effect, but there are things that are commonly attributed to the Bible that are not even in the Bible. God helps those who help themselves. That's not in the Bible.
Yeah.
Cleanliness is next to godliness.
Yep.
A lot of these kind of aphorisms or whatever that people attribute to the Bible is really, I think, what is it? That old Farmer's Almanac that Benjamin Franklin started. And so you would have a lot of these in there, and it just got sort of inserted. Here's a good one. Money is the root of all evil. Okay. The actual text from the Bible, right, is the love of money is the root of all evil.
Okay.
So the Bible does not condemn wealth or money. It condemns the love of it.
Right.
Because the love of the accumulation of wealth is at the heart of people and injustice among people. How do you get money? Well, if you love it so much, you'll do anything for it.
Right.
And so, yeah, so that's one.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of that,
something to think about. So anyway, I guess we should start the show, huh?
Yeah, let's get started.
So anyway, hello and welcome to the second season of Monkey Bread Theology. And my name is Tim. I'm the asker of the questions. I'm the one that likes to make Jovan think.
Yes.
And sitting across the table from me,
it's me. I'm Jovan Paez. I'm back for season 2. They kept me on. I signed the contract.
The long term.
Long term. As Deadpool says to Wolverine, I'll do this till I'm 90. Right.
There you go.
Well, I'm glad to be back. And 2025, it's started off rough, hasn't it?
It has that. And one thing I do want to point out real quick, in regards to the show, we are going to move the day that we release episodes. We had been releasing on Thursdays. We're going to start releasing on Friday mornings.
All right.
So just make it a little bit easier for us all the way around. And hopefully that won't be a problem for you folks. If you're new to the podcast, we have a website. It's monkeybreadtheology.com. And it's a place where you can go and ask questions. But tonight's question, it's like you said, Jovan, the year is starting off kind of rough. Of course, we're only a couple days into it, but it does bring up a good question, and it's one that I hear asked a lot. And that is, why does God allow pain and suffering? And we've seen some evidence of that already this year.
Yeah. That is a question that a lot of people think about.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people react to, and even sometimes it's faith crisis.
Yeah.
And for some who don't believe in God, it's evidence that there is no God.
Well,
and so,
if it's such a loving God, why is he allowing this to happen?
Right. So, like, I think what Degrassi, Neil Degrassi,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he was asked about why he didn't believe in God, and his number one answer is, with so much suffering in the world, it's hard to believe that if there is a God, he would allow it to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that is, he's sort of the front man of science right now.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, it was Bill Nye.
Mm-hmm.
Before him, Carl Sagan. And so forth.
Well, newer,
but
different show.
Yeah, different show. And but there are a lot of areas of the topic pain and suffering that that his response is not uncommon. It's very common. It's this existential or the evidential argument of pain and suffering, that there's all this pain and suffering and no one seems to be stopping it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is observably compelling for a lot of people.
Right.
But the thing about that is it doesn't, I don't think it really explains everything. And I think it also doesn't take into account everything. And so what I want to do right now is sort of do a crash course.
Okay.
And one that I hope will be helpful and is really the high points of the question of pain and suffering, and in light of, for example, the shooting, the car crash, and then the shooting over New Orleans during New Year's this year. And then just, some of the things that are hitting the news of different kinds of just violence. It's hard to think of the beginning of a new year when we seemingly have started off on the wrong foot.
Right.
And so what I want to do is let's answer this question and talk about some real practical things. I think all of us who live on the planet long enough experience a kind of tension where we're like, this place is so wonderful,
mm-hmm.
but there are things that are happening that feel like it's so out of control.
Right.
And I think we, as Christians, as believers, even of any stripe, all stripes of believers, we need to come to grips with pain and suffering.
Mm-hmm.
The truth of the matter is, many religious groups have different approaches to the issue of pain and suffering. Some don't even accept that pain and suffering is real, like the Mary Baker Eddy group, Christian Science.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and so there's that group. There's other Eastern religions that treat pain and suffering as sort of a purging. It's just what life is. Life is suffering. Mm-hmm. And the more you can learn to free yourself of the constraints that lead to suffering, then you can handle, pain. You can handle all those things because, you've been fully purged and
mm-hmm.
you are better prepared to meet the enlightened or the eternal one and be forever joined. There's a lot of those sorts of things. And I'm not trying to give a full articulate synopsis of all those point of views, but you have these different approaches. And
aren't there some that believe that it's, trying to think how to phrase it, your own fault? You're getting punished.
Well, yeah. For example, in Eastern religions that believe that reincarnation is a real thing, right? That is the idea that once you live your life, if you reincarnate in some form and another person or an animal or something, then that is a result of a punishment that you haven't finished doing whatever you needed to do to go to the next level. So reincarnation, typically, my reaction, what I see from this Western point of view in our Western society, people think, oh, reincarnation is a wonderful thing. I was, King of England or something, or something, a pilot during World War II or something.
Butterfly.
Yeah, a butterfly. I remember the petals. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we treat it as some sort of positive thing, but reincarnation in its actual religious context is not a positive thing. It is a punishment.
Okay.
So life is punishment until you have overcome and transcended, because either you've given up your things or you've accepted balance. You found balance in life, suffering and pain and all that. So Eastern religions have a different, I think there are a lot of different approaches. Even Islam has different approaches about suffering. It is the will of God. If you suffer, it is the will of God, and there's nothing around it. His will is solid. It is firm. It is, God is so immanent in that point of view that if you suffer, it is will. It's his direct will. Christianity, on the other hand, and Christian philosophers have wrestled with the doctrine or the issue of pain and suffering for a long time, trying to provide either an explanation or a clarification, and those two are not the same.
Right.
A clarification is more along the lines of definition. For example, yes, if God created the universe and everything in it, then consequences are indirectly connected to God's initial act of creation.
Okay.
So unless it's primarily intended, for example, God created the universe. God created the laws of gravity in order to make this universe function. Well, guess what? We've learned from physics that two things cannot occupy the same space at the same time. Well, when a car and a person seek to, the laws of physics then that God created make it such that we live in a world that has real physical consequences. So those things are indirect. They're not God directly making that person walk in front of a car or the car beeline straight to you under this hypothetical, right? So there are things that God directly does, like he directly creates the laws of the universe. He directly creates human beings that are frail, that have some endurant capacity in their body frame, but are compared to other things and materials in the world, they will be crushed, right? We're not invulnerable. We're not Supermen.
But he did create us with free will.
And then there's the other kind of element to that, free will. And free will is our ability to choose other than, right? I was not destined to wear my Biola University shirt today, dealing with pain and suffering, where I studied a lot about apologetics. But today I put it on and this is what I'm wearing. This is, I think, in terms of my knowledge about God, I think God knew I would wear it today, but him knowing it is not him intending it.
Right. Now, do we say anything about the pain and suffering in your hat?
Oh, well, the Golden State Warriors are doing okay. They're all right. You know, they lost recently, but hey, every team loses. But getting down to the Christian point of view, we're dealing with a series of responses. So I want to kind of walk through some of them. But let me back up. So when dealing with pain and suffering, there's a couple of definitions I think we need to kind of make sure we're on the same page here. Pain is the experience of suffering, right? Suffering exists because we feel pain.
Okay.
But we feel pain emotionally, and might argue it intellectually, but mostly it's physical or emotional. Right. And the issue there is all pain bad? Is all pain wrong? And are there different classifications of pain and suffering? And I think there are. So when you watch Home Alone, right, and you watch, Marv step on a nail,
right? Oh, that hurts just watching it.
Yeah. And when that whole movie is the portrayal of physical pain,
right?
Okay. Now all of that is traumatic pain. But then, for example, we turn around and watch something else, or experience life from another point of view. When you're cutting onions for breakfast or something, or dinner or whatever, and you slice the tip of your finger. You know a guy who likes doing that.
Yep.
Yeah, we're not going to say anything, Jim. But
yeah, Jim.
Jim. But when you do that, your body is telling you just hurt yourself. The signals that are telling you that something in your body is not correct.
Right.
Now all of a sudden we're alert. And as a diabetic and watching a lot of family members suffer physical amputations due to the consequences of that disease, I've seen it where people can't feel anymore.
Ooh.
And they might hurt themselves really bad. They don't know they have a sore. They don't know a lot of things, turns into a disease or an infection. That infection affects the blood, and all of a sudden they're in a coma and they pass away. And so there are good reasons. There are good pains. Their signals of pain by themselves are not wrong,
right? Because
our body depends on them for telling us if we've touched something hot, too hot, if we're burning, if we're on fire, if we have something plunged into us that shouldn't, a foreign object,
right?
All kinds of things, and these are the things that either ask us to have help, call for help, and even pain can be a threshold for some moral things. For example, firemen or police officers who must decide to enter into a painful environment,
right?
Actually create our appreciation for something doesn't exist until it's visible. Right? Courage.
Yep.
Right. We see courage when someone is willing to enter into something they know is painful and dangerous, in order to do something good. Right. So pain. I just want to make a point here, and I may not be as sophisticated as I could be at this point, but I want to be clear that pain can be defined. It's like a diamond, has many facets, right? And one of them is there is pain that is good. There's pain that tells us we're sick, we're hurt, we're injured. My hand is stuck in a rock, or whatever. And there is also then pain caused by evil intentions.
Okay.
So now we're dealing with moral pain, moral evil, moral suffering. So there's non-moral. Now we're dealing with moral. And that means there is an actual association to some sort of moral law that is being violated while I am being exposed to pain.
Okay.
Okay. So in other words, if I'm just angry at you, Tim, and I come and I knock you across the head, right? Or you got really mad at me and like, burn down the joint, that's a moral decision that's causing me pain. Okay. War can fall into that category. Famines can fall into that category. For example, if there are economical decisions that a dictator makes in order for his people to not receive food or water or whatever, his people suffer or her people suffer because of those moral decisions.
Right.
So the pain of hunger is normal, but once it becomes extended because of a choice, someone else, it becomes a moral problem.
Right.
Okay. So there are moral components to this and that we have to evaluate. And then there are natural components. And I'm putting this differently than, for example, that we have sensations for pain. Things that like help us determine cold weather. But there is natural phenomenon that causes pain. Tornadoes. When cold and hot wind vectors connect and they begin to one ascends and one descends, it creates this. If there's enough of that happening, it creates the vortex of the tornado, right? At least that's how I understand how those things happen. Guess what? Someone decided to build a city, several cities. Said, this is a great place to put a bunch of communities. And they did that. And we know these to be Tornado Alley, right? We decide to put families in these lands.
Right smack in the middle.
Right smack in the middle, or, hey, let's build a house on this, on the fault lines, in California, right? Yep. So,
how about the sandy cliff here?
Yeah, right. I had a friend who lived on a cliff house, apartments, and it became a news story because their backyard began to just fall off from under them. And their back door, you opened it and it was just a straight drop in Pacifica, California.
No, thank you. So you choked me up.
Yeah. So these are sort of ground clearing issues, right?
Right.
But natural disasters, we call them, or natural evils or natural pains. They are non-moral things that happen in our world that affect us physically, right? Pain, and they only become moral. Okay, here's an important, I think, distinction here. Natural disasters only become moral issues if you're going to blame someone who created the natural conditions of the world. Otherwise, they are strictly speaking non-moral.
Right.
But as a Christian, we believe God created the world. We believe God created the sand dunes and the forces that would make a sand cliff, a cliff that shouldn't be built on in the first place. And God created the forces that create tornadoes and hurricanes, tsunamis, and those sorts of things. So when people react by saying there's too much suffering in the world to believe that God exists, they're saying that none of this seems to have a divine purpose except for us suffering. And that assumption, commonly shared, is not the only assumption that's proper to assessing when people suffer due to tsunamis or hurricanes or tornadoes. I mean, no one told us to build our communities in these locations. Right.
People have to take responsibility for their actions.
Yeah, sure. And that's our freedom of choice, right? I mean, We know communities live in Tornado Alley and they're not always hit by tornadoes.
True.
Right. But we shouldn't be shocked when a class, 4 or 5, whatever it is, comes through. I mean, when I was in college, in Tennessee, in the West Tennessee, in Henderson, Tennessee, there was in the nearby town Jackson, the town that night I think got hit by 10 plus tornadoes in one night.
Wow.
And then a couple years later, a friend of mine was, living there still, and they got hit with another batch of tornadoes and lifted up his car or flipped either his car or another car and sandwiched them.
Wow.
So, it's a real phenomenon, right? But it doesn't happen all the time, right? So we build our communities. But the thing is, we have natural disasters. We have, our body's designed to feel pain, and in a lot of ways to tell us if we're sick or if we're around something dangerous. Pain is designed to actually protect us,
right?
Our sensitivity to it. And then, of course, there is moral choices that people make that cause pain and suffering. These are essential elements to it. The moral or the explanatory part is how do we wrestle with it? So clarifying the kinds of suffering out there is important. But as a Christian, as a believer in God, there is a good God that exists, we're confronted then with the first challenge, which is a logical problem of evil. And that one is, well, if a good, benevolent God exists, who's all powerful and all loving, right? He exists, he's all loving, he's all powerful, and pain and evil exist. How do you deal with that? There is this philosophical argument, goes back centuries, and it goes like this. Well, either God exists, and if suffering exists, then he must not be all powerful.
Okay.
Because he cannot stop it. Or does not stop it.
Right.
Since it is not stopped, he cannot be all powerful. Because if God exists and he is all loving, then he would stop it because he loves everyone, or is all what love is. And love would protect people that are loved, right?
Right.
So he must not be all loving then. He could be all powerful, but not all loving. Or he can be all loving, but not enough power to stop it. So in each of these sort of statements, if God exists, then he is either not powerful enough or not loving enough. Because if he was all powerful, he would stop it. So that must impinge on his love. But if he is all loving, he must not be all powerful, and then it impinges on his power. So either way it goes, we do not have an all loving or an all powerful God. Most likely then we don't have a God at all. So this sort of argument is common. It's a logical problem. And the only real response to that is necessary is that for the logical problem, you ultimately have to deal with one explanation for that. That God has a good reason for pain and suffering to exist.
Okay.
And I just listed one already. Pain and suffering exists because it helps us and protects us and gives us tools to navigate a world that could hurt us. That, by definition, is the only answer I need to explain the logical problem of why we suffer.
Right.
But it's not sufficient for a lot of people. There would be other logical answers that explain why, if God exists and he's all powerful and he's all loving, and yet suffering exists, there's other explanations for that as well. The number one answer to that is free will.
Okay.
The number one answer to why suffering exists, and God being all good and all powerful, is free will. And the reason for that is because when God gives us moral free will, our choices have actual consequences.
Yep.
And when our choices have consequences, freely chosen by us, then there's a good explanation as to why it happens. But free will is not simply an explanation for why things happen. They're an explanation for how God made us. So think about this. This goes then back to a deeper question. It goes back to the question of what theologians call the decree.
Okay.
The divine decree, which is the moment when God said, I'm going to make everything. Okay, so the divine decree. The divine decree is kind of a debated discussion. I'm not going to get too much into a lot of the debates of it, but basically the idea is this. When God decreed to create everything, that includes he knew who would be lost, who would be saved, who would be evil, who would be, good and repent, and bad and, not bad and repent, and then good and fall away. He knew everything. He knows everything. He knows the course of history, all of that. He is in full control of everything.
Right.
Okay, including salvation, history, the movement of history, the dinosaurs in the ground and all that. And as someone who believes that free will is compatible to the divine decree, because there are people who don't. There's some people that believe that when God created and decreed everything, free will is somewhat an illusion. Okay. And I'm not one of those. I believe that free will is compatible with the divine decree. And we could talk about that that's a whole long conversation. But the point of the matter is, in the divine decree, God created beings, according to the Bible, that are made in his image, Genesis 1:26 and 27. When God creates people or humans in his image, there's a free moral component to it. There is a relational component to it. God is wanting and desiring to have we might say a real relationship with us as real, free choosing beings.
Right.
And that requires the capacity to choose him.
Or not.
Or the negative of that is not. And
ignore that sound.
Yeah. So they're calling me, the theologians are calling me.
They're coming to get you.
But when we think about then this idea that a part of the divine decree is that he was going to create beings made in his image that are able and capable to freely choose him, that means they also have to, as you nicely put, not choose him.
Right.
And otherwise he's making rules. Otherwise he is not making us, he's making something else. Right? So the free will argument as an answer to the logical problem, God is either not all loving, or he is not all powerful. Because if he was all loving, he'd want to stop evil. And he's not all powerful because he could stop all evil. The reason why God allows for it to happen is that in choosing to create moral beings, they must be free. And if a relationship with us is part of his program for creation, right? Or his agenda for creation, if we could say it that way, then by necessity, you have to allow for the possibility that we're not going to choose him and the consequences that come from that. So just like when parents decide, I want a family, Let's start a family.
Right.
We have no idea what our kids are going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
And all we can think of, and I'm not saying this is not a true parallel to God, because God knows everything, knows all the decisions we're going to make, etc. But my purpose in the analogy is just to make this particular point. When people say we want to have children, all we can think about is the relationship.
Right.
Someone to love me back, the relationship that emerges from that. And again, I'm not stating this in a way that we're affirming that God needs to grow, that God created the universe in order for him to be truly a God, right? That he's kind of leveling up.
Right.
God doesn't need to level up because he is all things. He is everything. He is all that is. So God has no potential like we do. We enter into relationships. Our friendship, for example, Tim,
right,
began small and it's developed. Okay. And has improved my life. And so we have that on wax, as they used to say. And so that is me progressing as a human. God doesn't do that. By definition, God is. He's not going to be. Okay.
Right.
So, but all of this to say is when he created us with the capacity to choose him, which offers up the negative side. And so thus moral evil is a corruption of the morally good that was created, the naturally good. It is not a thing itself. It is a corruption. So another analogy that could be helpful is a iron hammer. Once affected by rain will do what?
It'll rust.
Rust is the corruption of that material.
Right.
But rust is not a thing itself. In this analogy, evil is not a thing itself. So whereas you have, the ancients like Eastern religions love to do yin and yang, for example, the dualism, if there's a darkness, there's a light. If there is an evil, there is a good, right? If there is the divine creator, there is the divine annihilator, right? That, from a biblical worldview, does not exist. They're not dueling competitors. They're not dueling equals. Evil is a corruption of what is good. Satan is a corruption of what God has created. So he doesn't exist independent of God creating him. He exists because he corrupted. So the first response then to the logical problem of evil is essentially, it is essential to state that there is a good logical reason why God, who is all loving and all powerful, would create a world in which evil exists. We have to first acknowledge that evil exists, but what I did at the beginning was clarify that there are different kinds of suffering. Some are natural evil, some are moral evil, and some are just sufferings that we experience because our body is designed fully equipped to articulate and explain to us something's wrong in our body or something's wrong around our surroundings. Or the flip side, something is amazing.
Right.
With the same sensors that we feel pain or the sun, we also experience sunburn. Right. So because we chose to stay out, or because we chose not to use sunblock or whatever.
Right.
So then there's what's called the evidential problem of evil. The evidential problem of evil. In a nutshell, it comes from the word evidence. And it's sort of the Degrassi argument. there's just so much pain in the world. There's so much suffering in the world, and it seems to be just for nothing. And there's no explanation for it. It's just, babies are getting cancer. Babies are born with their hearts on their chest, not inside their body. There's a DNA disease. There's all kinds of stuff, right? We have COVID. COVID really challenged the question of evidential evil. And the real issue there again is, first you have to acknowledge, we cannot ignore that evil is happening. Suffering is happening. It is on our front door. It is in our bedroom. It is in our living room. It is everywhere, right? And so because of this sort of the calculus of suffering, we have to deal with the question of, is all this just, simply unexplainable? What is it? Gratuitous, right? It's just happening. Well, if you say it's gratuitous, if you say it's just, there's no answer, there's no reason for all of this suffering, you are really ignoring the biggest influence in suffering in the world, us.
Yeah.
You're ignoring the human component to suffering in the world. So if, for example, human selfishness is at the heart of suffering, how much percent would you put on it? 9. I'm not asking you literally, but let's play this game for a moment. How much would you say that human choice, greed, for example, would play a lot in how you evaluate why people suffer?
Oh, yeah. Right. Definitely.
So greed, ideals, right? So if you have, for example, the ideal that country is a bunch of infidels and they're ruining the world, you might want to hijack an airplane and crash into the World Trade Center. Okay, so on an ideological level, humans make choices that have grand scale consequences, right? I don't know. I have not truly invested. Maybe some people might get mad at me here, but I haven't truly invested in studying like global warming.
Okay.
Largely because I believe that God created this world in such a way that the world will be fine. So I have a long view hope and belief, or a belief that gives me hope that whatever we do to this planet, it has a way of going, I'm not done.
Yeah, right.
I'm reminded of the comedian George Carlin. He being a kid in the 90s and watching HBO specials, there was this one special he did, and he was just kind of going off on the human arrogance of save the whales, save the trees, save the bees, save the whales, save those snails. And then he goes off, he goes, save the planet? He goes, and he just kind of jeers at that idea, just the kind of arrogance that we have that we can save the planet. He said, we are like a bad flea to the planet.
Right. Okay.
And eventually the planet will figure out how to counter what we're doing. And I think that's amazing, because not only is he an atheist, was an atheist, he's passed away. I think he knows now, but the thing is, so I don't put a lot of investment in it, because I think God created the planet to do great things. But the reality of when you pump out a lot of toxic fumes into the atmosphere, I mean, we live in Bakersfield, California.
Right.
We collect all the bad air from Northern California. It just loves to find its way down here. And we get things like valley fever. We get all kinds of stuff, right? So we truly can create environments that hurt us.
Right. They're toxic.
Toxic, like living with a smoker, you get secondhand cancer, lung cancer, or you get asthma. My mom developed asthma because she had a smoker for a husband. There's a lot of things we do, is my point. So I think when we talk about the evidential problem of evil, as if there's no cause to this or no explanation for this, I think one of the big pictures we need to walk away with is, yes, we can account for a lot of evil in this world, but we have to take ownership that it's not unexplainable.
Right.
And part of the issue is owning that it's us.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the question in the evidential problem of evil, though, is, can you find an answer for every reason we suffer? And another element to that is, the assumption is, if you cannot find a good explanation for why little Sally Joe got cancer at 5, then there is no good God. That does not logically follow.
Right.
And the problem there is you have made an assumption that unless you know the positive why, then there is no good why, no good answer. And that doesn't logically follow. We have all kinds of things that we don't know why.
Yeah.
And we value it and we appreciate it. We know there's some meaning. We just don't know what the meaning is, right? We don't know. We don't know. And this might seem flippant here, but we don't know how in the world does a bee actually fly. It's not supposed to be able to fly,
Right.
but it does. And that might seem silly to some, because someone out there might be, I'm an expert in bees. We know why bees fly, but the common quip about bees is
aerodynamically,
they're not aerodynamically designed to fly, but they do.
Yeah.
And yet here we have a lot of people suffering. The Bible offers a biblical worldview. And this is what's powerful about making sure you have a solid biblical worldview. The biblical worldview gives us a lens to appreciate every component of suffering. Because as a Christian believer who with a biblical worldview, we know that sin, when it was brought into the world, brought forth decay in this world. And therefore, the reason why there is so much suffering in the world is because there is sin in the world. In other words, moral evil affects physical evil, and the world has been ravaged by it. There's this book, I forget the author of it, but it's entitled Genetic Entropy. And what's interesting about it is entropy comes from the idea that things are falling apart. And we often hear about entropy from the laws of thermodynamics. Was the first law of thermodynamics is a matter of the principle of conservation, law of conservation, that it basically says that neither matter and energy are neither being destroyed or created destroyed. And then the second law is of entropy, that everything's winding down.
Okay.
Everything's winding down. So like a clock, or like a battery, the universe is winding down. We will never experience it in our lifetime, but the second law of thermodynamics tells us that eventually there'll be a heat death in the universe because we're winding down, which tells us that we had a beginning at some point. Okay. Well, guess what? There is a sense of genetic entropy in which the human genome has all these mutations in it and all these things that supposedly, according to Darwin, is supposed to be really great for us. But we really have, I think, very few genetic mutations that have been really amazing for us.
Right.
Unless we like second heads, unless we like, but I'm not here saying that we have no mutations in us that are beneficial, but by and large, the idea of mutations to create better species, we're not saying that, in my opinion. But genetic entropy is this idea that at some point our genome was perfect. So further back you go,
The better it was.
the better our human ancestors were
Mm-hmm.
than they are today. Okay, those genetics get worse over time is my point.
Mm-hmm.
Darwin said we get better over time through our genetic mutations. Like we'll get X-Men eventually. We'll get Wolverine and we'll get, Professor X and we'll get all these guys and it'll be great. It'll be amazing. But that's not what's happening. It's the other way around. And the notion there is from a biblical worldview, we can actually explain that. We were created by God in a pristine state. And over time, as we've lived outside the garden, access to life eternal, we have decayed and we have mutated, and our mutations are not beneficial to us. And so we suffer. We get diseases. We get DNA diseases like cancer.
Mm-hmm.
We get RNA diseases. We get diseases in our bone marrow. We get all kinds of diseases. And sometimes we create diseases.
Okay, right.
Okay. Like there are right now stations across the entire planet that are designed of creating the next disease, the ultimate disease killer. Right.
Right.
And they do it so that they can create, vaccines for it and find ways to prevent it and all kinds, but they have to create the monster in a lab. And what happens
to create
And what happens when it sneaks out?
Oops.
Right. We get a pandemic or something.
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, we, from a biblical worldview, we actually we can appreciate that all disease and all these problems of suffering go back to either biological genetics or human free will choices.
Yep.
So we understand the evidential reasons. And the question then becomes, well, then why doesn't God stop it? Well, this goes to the second half of the evidential problem. There must be a good reason. We must know the good reason. Otherwise, everything is gratuitous. Everything makes no sense. People are suffering for no reason. And God isn't doing anything. Well, that is a very interesting question. Because if suffering it has no answer, right? It's just going on and on and on. Then yes, you can say that it appears that God is doing nothing with suffering. If we don't know why a person is suffering, then we don't know when or why God isn't intervening, you might have a good answer for that. Maybe God doesn't. Maybe if God exists, he's not as good as we say he is, or he doesn't exist at all. But from a Christian biblical worldview, we believe God is doing something about evil. And he's working that out in Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that component to the answer from a Christian worldview, is that, well, God is not sitting on the sidelines just watching the human drama play out, and we're all suffering for no reason from our point of view.
Mm-hmm.
We're obviously suffering because human evil, physical evil, genetic evil, entropy, etc. But God has not been sitting on the sidelines. He's entered into our world through Jesus Christ in order to undo the evil in our world. So what does Jesus offer? Well, in terms of human evil, he offers us a way to not be evil.
Right.
He gives us a practical relational example of what a godly or a God-reflecting person looks like and behaves. So if we love God with all our heart, mind, and soul, according to Deuteronomy 6, 4 and 5, and if we love our neighbor as ourselves, according to Leviticus 19:18, which are the two greatest commandments upon which all of Scripture hang, and therefore our relationship and our religion, well, imagine a world in which that was actually happening. Imagine a world in which people actually said, I'm not going to be selfish because selfishness is a form of idolatry, because whatever rabbit or carrot I'm chasing is not God. So that's a form of idolatry.
Right.
Paul even says that in his letter to the Colossians, avoid covetousness, which is idolatry.
Mm-hmm.
So chasing after that money, the love of money being the root of all evil. See, is then a problem. And if we learned how to treat all of our resources as gifts from God and use them in his service and use them in his service to love our neighbor, now we have the teaching of Jesus showing us how to undo evil in our world.
Right.
And God is not sitting idly by. Richard Dawkins in his book, Rivers Out of Eden, several years ago, 89, I think. He closes one of his chapters and he begins talking about how we live in an indifferent universe. DNA doesn't care. It just is. In other words, the suffering we experience. His attempt at that time to wrestle with suffering was, we just suffer because that's what life is. The world universe doesn't care. DNA doesn't care. So you got a cleft tongue. So you got a cleft lip. So your ear was, on the top of your head and on the side of your head. DNA just does. There's no, good intentions by DNA.
Yeah.
That's all you live. That's all it is, right? If that's all it is, then Dawkins is right. Just, there's this professor named Alex Rosenberg. I forget what university he's at. He might be at Duke University. He wrote this book, a guide to an atheist guide or something to the universe or something. And in one of the chapters, and actually the way he ends his book, and I was reading this, I couldn't believe it. He said, just take some Valium. Just take some, this is my greatest advice for you for life. Just take some Valium and just move on with life. In other words, just intoxicate yourself, ignore the pain and suffering. Just do some drugs and you're good. Okay. Christianity, on the other hand, is saying the way you deal with evil is by being good.
Yeah.
You overcome the evidential problem of so much evil in the world by being the people God created us to be. Made in his image, reborn to repent, to live a better life, and to love your neighbor and to love your communities. And this is why the church is so important, because the church is God's medium through which he brings grace into lives, love into communities. And when churches kind of retract and kind of stay inside their walls and don't engage the community, then there's a good argument we're not doing our job.
Yeah.
When churches are community focused and they're feeding the poor, clothing the cold or the hungry, the feeding and clothing, the poor have no clothes, the naked, so to speak, we're changing what's happening in the world.
Right.
And so maybe part of the issue of the evidential problem is the church isn't doing what it should be. Right.
Good point.
And so maybe there's something we need to be looking in the mirror about, but there is an answer. There are good explanations. Suffering and pain is not something that has no explanation or reason. You do not need to know every reason for every piece of suffering in the world.
Right.
God knows. If you believe God exists, God knows. And even if you don't believe in God, then honestly, there's no moral objection. Dawkins said it. DNA doesn't care. If DNA is all that there is, and we use these loving terms like Mother Nature, Mother Nature isn't a real thing either. Right up there with Santa Claus, right? Like in the East, I'm sorry. Okay. And the Easter Bunny and the fairy in the Tooth Fairy. Like, if we the problem with the skeptical or atheistic response in the evidential argument of evil is that they approach the topic from a moral point of view.
Yeah.
But morals is a human phenomenon, but it only truly makes sense if there is a moral giver.
Right.
A standard above all human beings by which we all agree that there are certain do's and there are certain don'ts. And that only makes sense when there was someone who gave that to us.
Right.
But if it's just, for example, a cultural or social agreement, if morality, rights and wrongs are just social contracts, then why not just write a contract where that doesn't matter?
Yeah.
That you need to know why someone is suffering. But no one does that. And I think largely because God put within all of us a conscience, a moral conscience that can see through a situation and see that something needs to be done that's right and avoid something that's wrong.
Yeah.
So part of the evidential problem is that. Then the final one is the existential problem. The existential problem of evil really taps into my personal experience.
Yeah.
I've gone through too much suffering to believe that God exists. Okay. That is where everyone's at.
And for a lot of us, even the Christians, it would be easy to say. I know things in my life. It'd be easy to say, well, if there was God, he would never let me go through that.
Right. If God exists, he would never let me, walk into that bar, drink that drink, or meet that guy or meet that girl, or, and so existential. This is the most difficult one. So C.S. Lewis was a significant Christian thinker during the 20th century, and he wrote a book called The Problem of Pain, which is a really analytical approach, kind of like what I've been doing so far. Everything I've been doing right now is pretty much analytical.
Right.
It's logical. It's somewhat philosophical. It's somewhat theological. It's not like comforting.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not comforting anyone, but so C.S. Lewis wrote this book, The Problem of Pain, and of course he is C.S. Lewis about it. He's parrying and thrusting, and you can just feel he's arguing with an invisible combatant, right?
Yeah.
And he's doing it with the cerebral strengths of his mind. Very powerful mind.
Would have been fun to be a fly on the wall.
Oh, I know. Well, a couple years later, after he got married, so I don't know if you know this, he got married later in life, never had his own children, but he met a woman, an American woman, and they developed a relationship. They ended up getting married. She had cancer. And they knew this, I think, going into the marriage, but he just wanted to take care of her and everything. So they had some time together, but as she's beginning to suffer, he starts jotting down notes. And his experience up until her death, even after her death, was initially published anonymously under a pseudonym. What is it? A pain. Oh man, I can't remember now. I can't remember the title for whatever reason. That stinks. But I think I might go. I'll tell you. Oh yeah. Let's see. It'll come to me, I promise. So, what C.S. Lewis ends up doing? Oh, A Grief Observed. There it is. A Grief Observed. So he writes this book. He gets published under a different title, under a different author, pseudonym. He eventually gets published under his actual name, but in it is basically his emotional reactions to losing his wife. The two books which are written, I don't know, within a decade of each other, couldn't be any different. Okay? They couldn't be. They could not be similar. They're not similar. They're so different. One is very analytical. One is a very, very deep, profound, logical, reasoned. This one is pain. This is emotional. This is unconsolable. Some of the most famous passages are things like where he said, go to God in prayer and ask him to help you. And what does he give you? A shut door in your face.
Ooh.
Right. And that's how we feel sometimes when we're going through personal pain. It seems like either, we're asking God to relieve us of the pain in front of us and it doesn't go away. and it feels like a shut door, a slammed shut door. And so C.S. Lewis famously in this book articulates just the organic nature of pain. Okay, especially losing a spouse. And the thing is, that's the existential problem of evil. That it's personal. It's part of our lives.
Yeah.
How do you logically reason through that? How do you work through that? And the real issue there comes back to what are your assumptions? Like, you never, I visit the hospitals, visit people who are suffering, and I don't sit there and I go, well, since God exists and he made human beings free will agents, suffering exists in the world, I hope you feel better today. That doesn't work at all.
No.
But sitting with people that you can't heal.
Oh, that's tough.
Loving people that you can't heal.
Mm-hmm.
Surrounding people with love that have lost jobs or loved ones, who are fighting through disease. There are no guarantees. There are no assurities. But this is one that is largely emotional, and rightly so. But people come to the issue with the assumptions they have accepted their whole lives. For example, there's a story in the Gospels where Jesus is walking with his disciples, and they come to him and they see a man who's crippled and he's laying on the floor, right? They come to Jesus and they ask him, "Teacher, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be like this?" Jesus' response was, "Neither. But he is like this so that you might see the kingdom." And he makes him walk.
Mm-hmm.
The thing there is, here are these people, these figures in Jesus' life, a leper who has no community except for those who are similarly perishing.
Right.
A man with a withered hand in the synagogue. Can't work. A blind man, deaf man, a mute. All these people are suffering. And I believe the gospel accounts when they talk about demons. And so people with demon possession, these are all existential. These are things of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Your personal experience of life is suffering, so to speak. And Jesus shows us that the best way to approach that is by grace and empathy. Grace and sympathy. Sympathy is you feel bad for the person going through it. Empathy, you from your experiences, you can sort of project what they're going through.
Right.
And so the problem of existential suffering is one of experience that no one else can go through it with you, like share it with you.
Mm-hmm.
They can only walk with you, sit with you. And because suffering is a very lonely experience. The book of Job shows us that entirely, where Job suffers essentially on the gamble of Satan,
Mm-hmm.
who's really challenging the goodness of God, saying, the only reason Job serves you is because you give him everything.
Right.
Take it all away. You'll see that you're not important to God. You're not important to him. You're not worth his allegiance. He'll see right through all that and give you up. And Job never did. He comes, some interpreters think he came just enough to cross over the line where God intervened, or he came up right to the line and God intervenes. Either way, whether he crosses the line, he's on the line, doesn't matter. God intervenes and never explains to Job why he's suffering.
Right.
Just that he is God. And he needs to trust him or not. And as God is in control of the universe, God is in control of the sparrow. He's in charge of the eagle, the donkey, the warhorse, the ostrich, the great beasts, the behemoth, the leviathan, all of that. The world is wild and you live in it. That's God's answer to Job. I'm in control of it, but it's also wild.
Right.
And that's a big, important point for all of us. Yes, God is in control of this world. Firmly believe that. God is solving the evil problem through Jesus Christ, if the church will listen. And we will be a force for good in a way that the church hasn't been in a long time.
Yeah.
Now, if we can do that, people can say, yes, there are a lot of bad things happening, but thank God for the church. That's the mission, right?
Yeah.
And people who are suffering in a world that is wild could see more clearly that God is at work because of God's people, God's providence, and God's care. And so these three kind of large categories loom over this issue. The logical problem, again, just, is a challenge about whether or not there's a good reason why God can still be all-loving, all-powerful, and yet evil exists. And the answer is yes. Any reasonable, logical answer to explain why free will is the big one, the big answer to that. And of course, we can also argue we suffer because he made us in a way that experiences the world through physical means, or good or bad, right? But there is a good logical moral reason, free will. Evidential problems is there's so much suffering, everything feels like there's no explanation. It's gratuitous. Your inability to have an answer for every single detail as to why suffering exists is not an answer. A lack of answer is not an answer.
Right.
From a biblical worldview, we have many answers. God created us with free will. God created us in bodies that are decaying, and we live in a world of free choice. We suffer, but Jesus is solving that, has already laid down the foundation work for it through the cross. The church is left behind to follow that, to be a response to evil in the world. And he will ultimately deal with this in the last day when evil will be finally destroyed.
Right.
So a Christian worldview has an answer, even if it's generic, for everything that happens. Ultimately, then, the existential problem is our personal experience of suffering. Many of us have gone through it. It is a faith crisis. It can be a faith crisis. I'm reminded of my mom, and I'll close with this on this. Reminded of my mom, and she's diabetic. I wish she had taken care of herself better. But eventually, it cost her kidneys, her eyesight. She developed the nerve damage where she couldn't walk like she used to. She lost the ability to really walk. So with this disease ravaging her, I can never shake when she would say things like, I don't know why. And she goes, I don't know why God let this happen to me, but I will praise him and blessed be his name. I might have my answers and reasons, right?
Yeah.
But her example, blind, on dialysis, and on a wheelchair, shows me that when you have a strong faith and you have a foundation for that, suffering doesn't go away. But how you approach it can be changed.
Yeah.
And especially when you have people who walk with you. And so the problem of the existential problem is the most personal. And I want to encourage everyone, when someone dies in the life of your family or friends, don't say, God needed an angel in his backyard or a flower in his garden. Because all that's telling that person is God took your loved one.
Uh-huh.
Maybe he did, but we don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
Death happens. There's one thing common to all is that we die. The best thing you can do is just say, I love you. Because that's honestly what we're trying to do when we come up with these little fancy lines, right?
Uh-huh.
Say, I love you. I'm here for you. You know,
You're not alone.
you're not alone. Here's a gift card to Taco Bell or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
get some food, you know, or I'll bring you food or something, you know, something. But too many times we make the problem worse by blaming God.
Yeah.
And
And how powerful is it that when you see somebody that is suffering and see them approach it with love, and that which Jesus is trying or is doing, when you see somebody going through something difficult, painful,
yeah,
and then you see them, you know, praising God, you know, and not losing their faith, not blaming God. How powerful is that?
yeah, it is. It's very powerful, you know. And I think people sometimes attribute faith in the middle of pain as weakness. You know, oh, you're just relying on a crutch to get you through. Okay. Well, religion isn't a crutch. It's how we approach life.
Right.
I believe God exists, and that it has not stopped my life from having dark moments.
Right.
But that's not the point of following God. The point of following God is not that we will be freed from hard, dark moments or disease or cancer or poverty or anything like that. The point about following God is God exists. And he has shown us not only through creation, but through Jesus Christ that he exists and that he loves us, and he seeks to renew our relationship with him if we're willing to repent and be born again and learn to walk in his ways that will actually improve the quality of life, not only in my own, but in the life of my neighbor. Because instead of being a selfish person,
Right.
looking out for number one and stepping on number two to do it,
Yeah.
I am now looking out for number two as if they're number one. And that's not a crutch.
Right.
That is loving my neighbor. So there is so much to get into on that.
Yeah.
But anyways, I think those points will be helpful for anyone as we think about, you know, why did God let this guy get into a pickup truck and run over people and kill 14 or injure 35 people in New Orleans?
Something like that. Yeah.
You know, it very well.
Yeah. And if you come up with questions, you know, please, we encourage you to go over to our website. There's a form there you can fill out, submit your question, and we'll try to tackle those. And Jovan has something.
Yeah. One, as Steve Jobs would say, one more thing. Imagine a world in which God constantly intervened every single time someone was going to do something wrong. Would that feel like our God was a hall monitor at every single? It'd be like, some of you might not remember this, but remember Windows 98? When you were going to write a document, you had Mr. Paperclip.
Oh, yeah.
Every time. Oh, it looks like you're writing a letter.
Okay.
It looks like you're writing a postcard. It looks like you're writing could you imagine every time you're about to do something, looks like you're about to take that piece of cake.
Yep.
Looks like it would be a tremendously different world in which we live.
Right. And it wouldn't be free will as much.
No, I mean, we would have this like constant thing. Oh, God knows what I'm doing. Well, of course he does.
Yeah.
but there is compelled by a relationship and this compulsion by force.
Mm-hmm.
And having a Mr. Paperclip or one of those PlayStation guys from Squid Games looking at you every single time you're doing something wrong is not a real relationship.
Right.
Because I do good because of my relationship to God. I don't do good because he's staring over my shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be just a really weird world.
Yeah.
So anyways, last food for thought, guys. Yeah. Hey, again, like Tim said, come to our website, monkeybreadtheology.com. Go to our Facebook page.
Yeah.
Same thing, same tag. And we want to thank the Ministry League Network for having us on the team.
Yep.
And hope you check out the other podcasts and other resources there.
Yeah.
They have a lot. So thank you guys.
Yeah.
Tim, it's yours.
All right. Well, thank you again. And I think that wraps it up for this show. And remember, we are moving release to Fridays. So don't look for us on Thursdays. Look for us on Fridays. And wherever you're listening to us, leave a comment, leave a like. We'd love to hear from you guys. Thanks, and we'll talk to you next time.